Hi loves, happy Wednesday. I've had some more questions regarding the trauma sensitive yoga teacher training and also regarding how I help people when I work with them online. So the first thing that I need to say is I've said this a number of times. I share perspective with people. I never directly give advice and I never tell you what to do. I share perspective and I help people find their own answers. Having said that, when people are processing things like grief and trauma and things that are kind of, like even if it's not grief or trauma, if it's general difficulties in life, they will often look for like a counselor or some form of therapist. In certain instances, people look at credentials, and then in certain other instances, a lot of people do provide support online, and we often find these people in like Facebook groups, right? So my position on this is that credentials are really important when it comes to taking advice and making decisions within your life, or if you know that you're on a healing journey and you know that you're not totally okay with yourself and you start looking for external help, credentials are important. Within the yoga industry and within the healing industry, there's a lot of people that offer various services, but when a person is vulnerable, it's important that that the person that you're working with is grounded and practical. So some of the questions that I've had include things like, do I do past life regression? And would I suggest past life regression? So for me, no, I do not do past life regression, and I don't suggest past life regression, mostly because, first of all, not everyone believes in past lives. From a yoga, Hindu, from an Asian perspective, past lives do feature within the philosophy, but those lives are complete, right? Like your past life is done and dusted, and if past life exists, you died in that life, and so we are present in this life now. So it's our job within this life to figure this life out. It's not necessary to try and go all the way back into the past before we were even born to try and figure out what happened before we died last time. We need to figure out what to do within the present moment within this life. So working with this idea of past life regression very often takes people down like the yellow brick road of no return, right? The so-called yellow brick road of getting totally lost and not even knowing who you are, where you started, and where you're going. So in order to maintain perspective and figure out the here and now, I work with this life. I also don't work with things like other planets and other realms of existence and all of this other stuff that that simply doesn't help the person in the here and now. Like if we are dealing with grief, if we're dealing with loss, if we're dealing with whatever emotion is coming up, other realms of existence don't necessarily help you when your feet are on the ground and your eyes are open first thing in the morning. The other question is, do I do shadow work? Again, no, I don't do shadow work. Mostly because for me, I realize, of course, like I'm practical. I realize that everyone has aspects within themselves that they may not like very much, or aspects of themselves that may be considered particularly dark or like negative or whatever label we want to put on it. But we don't need to dwell and focus on these things. So the more we kind of go down the pathway of working with the so-called shadow, whatever we want to call it, the more we're actually focusing our attention on all of these things, and so we're actively cultivating it. So if it's a balance of of beneficial and unbeneficial, and so for me the pathway of going down and kind of digging into every single aspect of darkness within yourself is entirely unbeneficial. It's beneficial to have awareness of these aspects within yourself that you may not be entirely comfortable with or you may not really like very much, but having an awareness gives you the capacity to work on it and shift it, as opposed to dwelling on it and kind of growing it within yourself. So no, I don't do this work. Then the other thing that has come up with quite a few people that have been in the TTC or that have come on private retreats with me is that a number of people may have been in talk therapy for a number of years. And so they may have been in talk therapy for a number of years, but they still haven't reached a level of resolution within themselves. So it really depends on the way that the talk therapy is approached, right? I was actually speaking to a psychologist who was a man in his 60s recently, and I said to him, what I'm finding is that people end up with a confused identity, and he agreed. He said, yes, this does happen very often, but when we when a person is totally confused, then it allows for them to start putting themselves back together, so to speak. And when I mean a confused identity, this can very often happen when people start role playing. So instead of referring to themselves as I, they start referring to themselves as like my past self, my future self, my inner child, all these kinds of different personalities that are used to try and, role play and kind of figure out where you are or what you're doing or how you're approaching things or trying to get perspective. But it's entirely using intellect and entirely using kind of imagination, pretending or speaking as if you're not yourself. So for me, I am always entirely me. I am I, right? Like we learn our identity, we learn to recognize ourselves within a mirror between the ages of 2 or 3. So I've spoken about this before in terms of me being qualified in early childhood development and working with children with special needs. We learn to recognize ourselves within the first 3 years of life. And so for some reason, then as adults, when people enter talk therapy, they suddenly start referring to themselves as like my past self or my future self, my inner child, all like these different personalities. And it's almost as if the recognition of who I am, who the first person is, suddenly becomes totally confused. So from an Asian perspective, from the world of yoga, whether we look at it as Hinduism, Buddhism, Confucianism, Taoism, or whichever Asian philosophy we look at, there is only ever yourself in the here and now. So there is I in this body within this time frame. So it's like we're working with the here and now, with this present age, with the present body that I've been given. Otherwise, it ends up being a total confusion, and then trying to figure out this fragmented psyche from a place of confusion can be very difficult, and it very often keeps people stuck in talk therapy for many years, investing a great deal of money into this, but not reaching any resolution. So the difference with using body-based practices is that there is, like I said before, it's a holistic approach whereby it's an integration of your mind, your emotions, your body, and your spiritual being. All of it being in the same place at the same time. So with an intellectual approach, a lot of women, particularly women, a lot of women have said, yes, I've spent a number of years totally dissecting myself, analyzing myself, figuring out all of the information, all of the data, but they've been processing everything from here entirely, and they're totally disconnected from themselves, totally disconnected from actually feeling into themselves, processing emotions, knowing how to, first of all, feel these emotions and then also process them without kind of getting lost in it, right? So this is the beauty of trauma-sensitive yoga, and specifically the approach that I use. Looping back to what I said initially with credentials, for me, I've worked with young children, so I've kind of worked with people at the very beginning of life, and I've watched and I've seen them develop, and I've seen, I've helped children who had gaps within their development, and then I've also done hospice counseling and worked with people at the end stages of their life. So for me, the beauty of this is that I've seen the beginning and I've seen the end, and it's helped me for my own process. It's helped me navigate my own in-between process of the very beginning and the very end. Of course, for me, I am a qualified healthcare practitioner, and I can be particularly intellectual, and I can analyze everything. Obviously, that's the the reason that I have credentials to begin with, is that I'm able to process a large amount of information. But at the same time, I bridged into the world of yoga and meditation, connecting entirely with my body. And for me, that is, on my personal journey, that is how I have been able to amalgamate everything for myself. And from that place of personal growth for myself and personal understanding for myself, that is why I now teach what I teach from a very candid place. So there's nothing to do with things like I said, there's nothing to do with past life regression. There's nothing to do with other planets. There's nothing to do with pretending to be something that we're not. We're using imagination and kind of pretending to be something that we're not. It's very much simply a process of learning to just be okay with who you are in the here and now. So I hope that's answered your questions. If you find yourself referring to past self, future self, inner child, all these different aspects of your own personality, try to start referring to yourself in the first person. So get back to I and start reclaiming that sense of self in the here and now. And so that's, that's just something that may help you in the interim. The enrollment for the 200-hour TTC is open. It's running in January in Thailand. I'll include the link for this. I am running a discounted rate this week, given that it's my birthday. So the information on that will be included on the link. For those who are unable to come to the TTC but would like to work with me online, this is also possible. It's very much the same approach, a connection of mind, body, emotions, and obviously the spiritual aspect that is specifically for that individual, and we work together online. And then if you're in the Ontario area at the moment, I'm available for the massage. So I'll include that link. So I hope that's answered your question, and so I hope it's given you some food for thought and some valuable perspective. The beauty of connecting mind, body, emotions, and your own spirit, like whatever that means for you, is that you are then able, once you've connected, you are then able to learn from your own insight and get your own wisdom, as opposed to consistently processing only external information. And like I said before, I simply don't see the value of past life regression or using other, referring to other planets in the here and now. It causes confusion, and it takes people down a pathway where they get very lost and very confused, and kind of keeps you stuck in therapy for a very, very long time. So that's that for now. Have a lovely day. Take care. Bye.